My friends call me Murphy. You call me ROBOCOP.
11 agonizing movie sequels that are so bad, they're good. There comes a movie once in a while that leaves the audience impressed with its original concept. People talk about it for years to come. And these special films develop a cult following, which is enough incentive for the money-making machinery to consider a sequel. Sometimes these sequels do justice to the original, but that is not always the case. We have endured some painful sequels that just give the franchise a bad name. Even though the critics spew venom over the content, the fans are drawn to such poor efforts simply because the original story arc and the characters they have loved from the first film. This video is going to be all about such trashy sequels that are light years away from the excellence of the original. The following movies are undoubtedly terrible, but fans still enjoy them as guilty pleasures. Leave your critic's hat behind as we welcome you to the world of disastrous films that are so fun to watch simply because they are so flawed.
Before we get into the explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click from you, but it means a lot to us. Thank you. Let's begin.
I am pain.
HELLRAISER, BLOODLINE, 1996. Horror fans are pretty sensitive when someone messes up their favorite movie, and HELLRAISER Bloodline is certainly not a fitting sequel for the classic horror franchise. However, it is not as terrible as some people make it out to be. The film serves as both a prequel and a sequel, and is all about Dr. Paul Merchant, who wants to destroy the Lament configuration to restore his family's good name. Lament configuration is the same puzzle box that opens the gates of hell and summons the dreaded Cenobites led by Pinhead. Merchant has built the reverse gate that would close the gates of hell, but Pinhead and his Cenobites are not going to accept this sitting down.
Merchant has a plan. Kill them all.
You might be frowning at the idea of Pinhead in outer space, and we don't blame you at all. It was certainly a premise that was pretty strange, and the only good thing about the film was that they left room for further sequels to follow. There are some problems with the direction, and the director disowned the movie after to some major reshoots that he wasn't part of. This caused some major editing problems that are hard to miss. Doug Bradley reprised his role as Pinhead, and while he was amazing as always, the flaws were too many to be countered by one brilliant performance.
The creatures that walk on its surface, always looking to the light, never seeing the untold oceans of darkness.
However, if you accept the bizarre setting, you might agree that this wasn't the worst HELLRAISER movie in the series. The plot tried to complement the first three movies, and it wasn't just another story about Pinhead. It is nowhere close to the original, but we still feel it is a watchable installment, and is one of those flawed sequels that is still quite fun.
Get over here!
Mortal Kombat Annihilation, 1997. We played the Mortal Kombat games. We watched the first live-action movie directed by Paul Anderson, and never, in our wildest dreams, did we imagine that a sequel like this would spoil the fun. In this movie, the mighty martial arts warrior Liu Kang is back with his group of powerful fighters, trying to save the Earth one more time. An extra-dimensional invasion will destroy the planet unless they can defeat the evil Lord Shao Kahn. Time is running short, and they have only 6 days before the Earth realm merges with the forces of Outworld.
As long as the portal remains open, your world becomes my world.
After the astounding success of the first Mortal Kombat movie, fans expected a cracker when the sequel was announced. However, the follow-up managed to disappoint the critics and fans alike, and ended up with poor box office takings as well. One of the first big mistakes that the makers fell for was to try and incorporate all of the characters in the plot, even when they didn't fit. The plot is inspired by the Mortal Kombat 3 video game, and the plethora of heroes and villains is confusing to comprehend. The lack of proper dialogue or continuity hurts the narrative, and even the martial art fight scenes were a bit lacking. Maybe you can watch it just for the Sonya's fan service fight with Mileena, where they waddle around in the mud. Maybe you just want to check out how bad a Mortal Kombat film can get. You are on your own here, because we cannot give you any other reason to try out such a movie. Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, 2008. Indiana Jones is back in action, and this time he is caught up in a Soviet conspiracy in the middle of the Cold War. He receives a coded message from an old colleague, and he pursues the lead alongside his assistant, Mutt Williams. They head to Peru, discover a magical skull that is made of a single piece of quartz. The Soviets have sent their best agent in pursuit, and if she takes control of the skull, the West will be in real trouble. Can Indiana Jones deliver the legendary skull to its rightful place? For many of the hardcore fans of the franchise, this was an unnecessary addition to the series. There are some plot holes so huge that they cannot be covered, even by the crisp direction of Steven Spielberg, or the captivating performance by Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones. The Russian threat doesn't feel that menacing, and Cate Blanchett's overacting ruined the charm of the invincible antagonist. The suspense could have been nurtured better, and it is hard to believe that we waited almost 19 years for a script like this. The film is still a lot of fun, with some amusing lines and a few believable stunts that look pretty cool, taking place in some satisfyingly over-the-top action scenes, such as the jungle chase. It is entertaining in a self-parodying sort of way, so you might not want to give this movie a miss after all. Batman and Robin, 1997. This movie is a sequel to Batman Forever, which entertained the fans with its decent narrative involving the Riddler. We wish we could say the same about Batman and Robin, which failed miserably to live up to expectation. Batman and Robin try their best to protect Gotham City from the evil forces, but their bond is weakened with the arrival of Poison Ivy, who has the ability to make anyone fall in love with her.
And you are...
Poison Ivy.
Ivy teams up with Mr. Freeze, and the villainous duo plans to freeze Gotham and introduce mutant plants to replace the population.
My mutant plants have the strength of the deadliest animals. Once you have frozen mankind, these babies will overrun the globe.
To make matters worse, Bruce Wayne's faithful butler Alfred is sick, and a new heroine, Batgirl, might have to step in to save the day. This is the fourth installment of the Batman franchise by Warner Brothers, and the absence of Tim Burton from the project seems to have affected the film quite badly. The movie was an over-the-top attempt to merchandise the characters and deliver a meaningless action movie that cared little for the legacy of Batman. The childish romantic love triangle between Batman, Robin, and the seductress, Poison Ivy, doesn't do the plot much good. The various stars appearing in the film, including George Clooney and Arnold Schwarzenegger, were miscast in their roles, with perhaps only Alicia Silverstone, the only saving grace as Batgirl. We also liked Uma Thurman as the alluring Ivy, but there was little she could do to save this sinking ship. The direction by Joel Schumacher was a mess. And while he redeemed himself in later works, this will continue to be a blemish on his career. Given the massive budget, you don't expect a Batman flick to rely solely on poorly timed humor and a surplus of villains. We missed the dark emotions and the intelligent development of characters through narrative, factors which have made previous Batman films a joy to watch.
Who do you think I'm gonna kill next? Come on.
Basic Instinct 2, 2006. Basic Instinct was a game changer in the world of erotic thrillers. The desirable Sharon Stone became a darling of an entire generation with her bold portrayal of a seductress. And it was one of the many cult classics created by the talented Paul Van Hoven. The sequel tried to cash in on the massive popularity, but it lacked the content which had proven to be the real star of the original movie. Catherine Tramiel is a crime novelist who gets into trouble once again when her boyfriend is killed in a freakish accident. When police psychoanalyst Dr. Michael Glass is handed the case, he is intrigued by the alluring woman. Thus begins the game of manipulations and sexual tension as Glass's obsession starts to develop.
Isn't that what turns you on?
Turns me on.
Sharon Stone returns one more time to the defining role of her career, in a sequel that is merely a desperate attempt to prove that she can still turn a few heads. While she is breathtakingly beautiful in every scene, a few things are certainly wrong with this movie. The action shifts from San Francisco to London this time, and the cast had to work like crazy to pull together the scattered plot. This is no thriller classic, but it is not the trashy disaster that some people criticize it as. The cinematography is stunning, and we must spare a word for the classy art direction that supports the narrative. It is the final 30 minutes that disappoint, because by now, you are starting to expect something special. The sex scenes are nowhere as erotic as the original, and while Stone dares to bear, the level of sensuality just doesn't match up. Overall, it is a sequel that could have been so much more had the makers not created the unnecessary confusion within the plot.
Hey, Pumpkinhead. You're gonna wish you never said that. Oh, yeah?
Problem Child 2, 1991. Do you remember the exploits of the 7-year-old Junior in the movie Problem Child? His antics and the bizarre plot made for a quirky and entertaining film, which is now regarded as a fine specimen of black comedy. Problem Child 2 continues his exploit, and this time, Junior moves to a new city after his parents get divorced. He faces off against the school bully and causes trouble everywhere he goes.
This is your last day of school, ever!
This time, however, there is a small twist to the familiar tale. There is a girl who just might be even worse than Junior.
Next time, you'll listen to me.
If we had to summarize Problem Child 2, we would say that it is a twisted and immature effort, but still hilarious. Yes, it lacks the charm of the original, the finesse of the jokes, and the fine acting performances. And sure, the critics had a lot of terrible things to say about this film. We wouldn't say they are completely wrong. It is just that sometimes we do love to laugh at silly jokes, and this kid had them in splits. It is a mindless sequel, something that the filmmakers must have intended. We look back at Junior's misadventures, the problems he creates for his father with fondness and nostalgia. These are some of our favorite childhood memories, so pardon us if we are biased. If you are feeling low, go ahead and try this one out. As long as you don't expect an Oscar-winning classic, you are bound to have a blast. Universal Soldier: The Return, 1999. We all loved the original Universal Soldier, which told the story of Luke and Scott, two US soldiers who were killed in Vietnam and resurrected in a secret lab. They were turned into super soldiers, but a reporter was on the trail to uncover their secrets. When Luke shifted allegiance to save the reporter, things escalated into a full-blown conflict. This movie is set 15 years after the events of the first movie, and Luke has now reverted back to normal. He is involved with the US military, hoping to perfect the Unisol program to produce a new breed of lethal super soldiers. When a computer system malfunctions, the army of Unisols threatens to take over the world. Luke must find a way to deactivate the computer system, Seth, before it's too late. Speaking of inferior sequels, we couldn't think of a better name than this one. Van Damme returns once again to one of the best action roles of his career, but without a proper story, things go haywire. The acting performances are painful to watch, and apart from the cheesy bits with Bill Goldberg, this film is all about Van Damme trading punches with Jai White. The pathetic one-liners don't really help the script, and the age-old idea of computers taking over the world isn't executed properly. The action sequences are frenetic and perpetual, as the makers try to hide the lack of plot with non-stop fighting. This movie failed so terribly at the box office that some sequels tend to ignore the events of this film as if it never happened. Well, sometimes pure garbage flicks can be a lot of fun, and this one is no exception. There are some modifications to the first Universal Soldier movie that are pretty amusing. The terrible disaster is fun to watch with a couple of beers, as long as you can handle the glaring loopholes in the narrative. Speed 2: Cruise Control, 1997. The two defining features of the movie Speed were the tension in the plot and the inclusion of Keanu Reeves. The idea of a maniac planting a bomb in a bus that was rigged to explode if the speed of the vehicle dropped below 50 miles was totally unique and ensured that the audience was kept glued to the edge of their seats. The sequel takes away the element of suspense, and Reeves refused to reprise his role. You have probably guessed the outcome already: a disaster. This time, the setting has changed into a cruise ship where Alex is vacationing with his girlfriend. A deranged passenger kills the captain and takes charge of the ship. A cat and mouse game ensues as Alex tries to nab this psycho, though he keeps getting away and causes more trouble. Once you watch this sequel, you will realize why Reeves turned it down. The scriptwriter has made a mess of things, and the plot barely exists. The lack of believability in the plot will baffle you, and the poorly timed jokes will get on your nerves. The actors don't do much to help the cause either, and although Sandra Bullock reprised her role from the original movie, this one performance she might want to erase from her memory. Her co-star, Jason Patric, is no better, with his stiff movements and their poor chemistry together. There are some crazy action-packed scenes that can entertain you, but don't expect much logic out of it. The climactic scene where the cruise ship crashes into the island was one of the most expensive stunts of that time. If only they spent some more money on the scriptwriter as well. Maybe this should be a good lesson for filmmakers on why they shouldn't randomly go for unplanned sequels. Give it a watch if you have the ability to withstand nonsense, and try to have fun with the meaningless hollow that prevails.
She said no. Maybe you have a hearing problem.
ROBOCOP 3, 1993. When Paul Van Hoven directed ROBOCOP in 1987, little did he know that a few years down the line, such a sequel would be made. The concept of a cyborg cop fighting crime and also dealing with the hazy memories of his past was loved by everyone, but for the third time around, the idea almost became tiring. It is ROBOCOP to the rescue one more time as the notorious Omni Consumer Products looks to evict the residents of Detroit so that they can build their dream project, Delta City.
Esteemed former chairman had a dream. He called it Delta City.
The people aren't willing to abandon their houses, and ROBOCOP takes on these ruthless developers, fighting for the well-being of the people. This sequel is more of an insult to the original, and it is pretty clear that the producers expected the well-established brand to sell itself. There was no effort to enhance the storyline, and the change from a solid R-rated action to a PG-13 gimmicks did not impress the fans. After the amazing original movie and a decent sequel, this one was a disaster that deserves to be erased from history. The ROBOCOP did everything from fighting robot ninjas to crashing cars, but even he couldn't quite fight the lack of plot in this movie. The badly choreographed fight scenes and cheesy one-liners stick out like ugly sores, and the film is more of a comedy than anything else. Peter Weller stepped into the role of ROBOCOP, and whilst it's difficult to endure the sight of someone else playing an iconic character, matters weren't helped by the fact that he just wasn't adequate enough. Unless you are up for a hilarious kid-friendly take on the ROBOCOP legacy, we wouldn't dare recommend this headache-inducing failure. Highlander 2, The Quickening, 1991. The first Highlander film told us the intriguing tale of an immortal Scottish warrior from the 16th century who now lives in New York City. Once he is reminded of who he is, he also realizes the threats from other immortal clans. He must fight to survive in this brutal world. Highlander 2 added a futuristic sci-fi twist to the tale, changing the setting to a world where the ozone layers are gone. The Earth is protected from the UV rays by a giant shield, and Connor MacLeod, the protagonist, is no longer immortal and has grown to be an old man. However, when immortals from another planet arrive, he must prevent the destruction of the Earth along with his aides. Usually, when the same director stays for the sequel and the cast is largely retained, hopes are high that the success of the first film will be repeated. Highlander 2 falls flat, and every good bit from the first film has been undone here. The intriguing characters are missing, the acting is abysmal, and the story makes no sense this time around. Why and how the Immortals suddenly arrive as aliens is never fully explained. The backstory of the original has been ditched for a poorer version that is totally illogical. We heard this movie wasn't really made the way the director wanted to, and even stars like Christopher Lambert and Sean Connery weren't happy with the end product. It is probably one of the worst sequels ever made in cinematic history, but it might be fun to sit around with friends and make fun of this movie. Son of the Mask, 2005. This sequel is set 11 years after the events of the original movie and centers on the chaos that ensues when an aspiring cartoonist named Tim Avery ends up with the magical mask of Loki. He has a baby with his wife while wearing the mask, and Loki is alerted of the location of the child. Odin orders Loki to find it and immediately put an end to all the problems being caused on Earth. But the baby seems to have the powers of the mask, and Loki must find a way to retrieve it before Odin punishes him. You know a movie is seriously bad when, based on audience votes, it is 10th on the list of worst movies ever made. The horrid writing and the unfunny jokes make it painful to sit through, and the disastrous CGI just makes it worse. The movie tries too hard to pay homage to the classic cartoons, but some of these scenes do not quite add up. In fact, there was a lot of controversy surrounding some of the scenes, which somehow escaped the PG-13 rating. The Mask was a classic act with Jim Carrey, establishing himself as a star of comedy, and this follow-up is not even in the same league. Even though everyone criticized the movie, Alan Cumming, who played the role of Loki, was praised for his performance. It is always fun to enjoy something outrageously flawed, and on those grounds, this film might be just what you're looking for.
And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.